Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1343. Aleph Shin Mem Gimel. And what we learned about is the Teshuva of a Tzaddik, basically. That though we're not discussing the very blemish itself, we're discussing how it's relative to the level and the stature of the individual. Like he said on top of the page, that the personality of Teshuva, the essence of Teshuva, is always relative to the level and the stature, or location, so to speak, level of the person. So being that a tzaddik is on such a high level of neshama, like he gave the example of the difference between an animal defiling the chamber of the king and a human being doing so. So even though the defiling may be worse by the animal, but that's the nature of an animal. There's no real punishment there. You clean it up. By a human being, it's chayiv misa, like he said. Person deserves the death penalty because a human being should have known better. And the same thing is in the difference between a minister and a servant. So a lower stature servant, if he does something, even if it's a more serious crime, but it's not as intense and doesn't have such an impact as a high-level minister, even doing something subtly different or defying the king is even in a subtle form. And the same thing he says, the difference between the sin of a lower level person and the sin of a higher neshamas. Then he explained the two levels of neshamas, zera adam and zera behema. That's a lashon in the zera adam, zera behema, the seed of man, the seed of an animal. It's like neshamas of man, neshamas of ban. Doesn't say that explicitly, but that's what it says in other places. So depending on that level, so of this zera behema, shalamata min hadas is katnas b'yesed, like an amoritz, like we said, it's a lower level soul, and the zera adam is a higher level soul, and the einish, the punishment, is commensurate not to the actual firepower of the sin or the transgression or the blemish, but the person that's doing it and they're relative to their level, as we discussed at length. And that's why with Shemoneh Esrei we say slach lanu. Even though Shemoneh Esrei is coming after Shema, we already dedicated ourselves with love. You're completely dedicated to God. And Shemoneh Esrei, you're on a higher level, Bittul mitzias, completely nullified. And so close to God in your understanding and in visualizing godliness, you're standing mamish before the king, literally. So why do you say slachanu? So adarab, on the contrary, he and his sentence, because you're so close to the king. So then the sense of the chet, the gadol, when he's not complete, you suddenly feel the inadequacy of things you wouldn't have even felt earlier. And that's why you say slachlan, which is even more than those that actually transgressed in physical transgression from the level of zera behim. In the parentheses, he added that elsewhere it goes even further and says that Aveda is considered like chetim, like sins, because you realize when you're standing, that as true as your Aveda is, Shekol Aveda ein amit is cloud. There's no all serving God is not as true at all compared to the
hi,
truth.
Is it David? Yeah, hi, David. Eliezer Gold from.
That the truth of is not true at all compared to the truth of God. And that's Vivad Medagdik Len, and that's the Teshuva of Tzaddikim due to their closeness. He says, Teshuva Tzaddikim mepnei akiru va'ili shalahem. Which is a very important line, because by Teshuva Bal Teshuva, we remember we says mepnei ha-richuk va'acheshech. So if you contrast here, the Teshuva is coming because of the closeness, you're feeling your distance, you're feeling the inadequacy. Whereas by a Bal Teshuva, when it comes from the bottom up, mamish from the bottom up, it's coming from darkness and distance, distress from the distance, not from closeness. But what we do see here, as I explained yesterday, is that the tzaddik has in himself an element of tshuva, even that relates to chet. However, it's not an actual chet. It's only relative to his level. So that's the key additional point, which, as I explained, and we'll soon see the significance of it, that we'll see the hiskalulus, the overlap, and the interconnection between the oyer of the tzaddik and the cheshach of the Baal Tshuva, because now the tzaddik also has a level of cheshach, except it's a different type of darkness. The darkness of the tzaddik is relative because he's reached such a high level of oyer. So he senses that distance. And by the Baal Tshuva, as we're going to learn, it's coming straight from the darkness itself. But we're going to continue now learning why then is awesome, why it comes, why will Moshiach be the one that will return these tzaddikim through tshuva? As I mentioned, as he mentioned as well, a tzaddik himself can come to that understanding that, as you get higher, you always want to go even higher. Ruach Tashav El Elikim. But we're going to now discuss, because Mashiach's coming reveals this level of Gilui, that compared to that, everything at lower levels become inadequate. That's what happens when Mashiach comes. And now we'll understand, this is the inyan, why this tshuva of tzaddikim we're discussing is dafka through Mashiach. Now, this doesn't mean to say a tzaddik can't come to such a level of awareness before Mashiach comes, but it doesn't have quite the same significance, as we'll see in a moment. Lefisha b'yemesa Mashiach, because in the days of Mashiach, Yizgala b'chin Shem Maha Elyon Shaloi b'derech b'kiyah. I'll explain what that is based on what we learned earlier in a moment. But let me just first translate it. Because then you'll have a gili of Shem Ma. And we're talking about Shem Ma. If you remember, this is the shamas of Ma, and it's connected Ma oil, like he said in the previous page. Difference between Shem Ma and Shem Ban. Shem Ma is gili oil. Bittul, Ma is also Bittul. And Shem Ban is Gematria Behema. Shem Ma is Gematria Adam. That the real Shem Ma, the full revelation of Shem Ma, not in the form of piercing, will be revealed when Mashiach comes. So what does he mean, Shalei b'derech b'kiyah? So if you look at the previous page, you'll see he already made mention of it. He said like this. If you look on the line that begins ha-mitzvahs, v'chein b'chol sa-mitzvahs, he says, v'hu sha'ayin d'shema nasa yesh, v'hainu d'b'igale shema k'moishi be'etzem, lei b'b'chinas b'kiyah. So what's he referring to? He's referring to what we discussed more at length on page 1323. On page 1323, if you go there, at the bottom of the page, you'll see it talks about Shema and Ban. And then he refers to the Maimarim of Chukas in volume 1 of Ayin Beis. Remember, you may recall, we're talking about the forehead, the Metzach of Adam Kadmon, that there's a glow when you see Chochmas Adam Teir Panov, the wisdom of a person glows on their face, especially on their forehead. What do you see in that glow? You don't understand any wisdom from it. You just see that this person has profound wisdom. And it pierces the forehead, meaning that this intensity, it pierces it, but you don't see what it is really behind the forehead. Because the forehead is still a form of a sheath, or you could say a curtain, a partition. That's the word I'm looking for. A mosach, a parsa. So it pierces through, like the example he gives back in volume 1, like think of a barrel that is filled with wine. And the wine is literally coming out at the seams, when we say, is bursting at the seams. So when you look at the seams, you see drops, little drops. From the drops, you know how much intensity there's inside the barrel. That's the example he gave. So the same thing is the Metzach does not reveal in any revealed way. Like, for example, when you talk about the cavities that reveal, let's say, the 2 nostrils or the 2 ears or the 2 eyes, those are connected and they have much more a revealing element, but they don't have the etzem quite. So he explained there that Shem Ma in Kabbalah, the expression is that Shem Ma HaChadosh in Atzilus comes from Metzach of Adam Kadmon. Other levels from Sag and others come through the ventricles, or I should say the cavities. There, the cavities are actual open channels. The nostrils, the oral nerve goes straight through the nostrils. But the Metzach doesn't have any opening. It's closed, it's sealed. And yet, it's something it pierces through because it's so intense. But till Mashiach comes, we will not see that intensity. It'll always only be a glow. When you say, the pasuk in the Novi, that the Alter Rebbe brings in chapter 36 in Tanya, when he explains Dir B'Tachtein, the revelation of the divine in the future, he says, no, your teacher will no longer be covered by a garment, meaning there won't be a garment covering his face. And your eyes will see your teacher himself. So what does that mean? That you won't see him through a garment, through a levush. You'll see the Moira himself, the teacher, the master himself. Kulam yedu esi. That is a revelation that will only happen when Mashiach comes. Till Mashiach comes, there's a tzimtzum, there's concealment, there's pasoyas, misachim, partitions, curtains, sheets, all the different names given for it. But when Mashiach comes, will be the Shema, not b'derech b'kiyah, not just a piercing where you see a bead, a drop of liquid, a bead of liquid that's shining through, but you'll see the actual intensity from the other side. Now, this is page 1323 at the bottom, if you want to go more in detail. And if you want to go even further, he also spoke about it earlier on page, if I recall correctly, let me see, maybe 1272. Let me see. Yeah. On 1272, he also brought this. Okay, so now that we know that what Mashiach will be is Gal Shem Maha Elyon, Shalei B'derech B'kiyah. In other words, not through just a piercing of, you just see a drop of it like the glow on the face. That there'll be the revelation of Shema, the Yudke Vavke and Shema, in its full glory, but etzem higher than it is the reflection through the face and the forehead. On the face and the forehead, you also see somewhat the wisdom of a person in that way, the glow, the shine, but the aura, if you wish. But Mashiach, you'll actually see what is behind the curtain, so to speak, behind the curtain of the panim and the metzach, of the face and the forehead. Like he explained that today we must have the panim and the metzach, or else we would be overwhelmed by it. You need something, some type of curtain, and that's the curtain of the face and the forehead. And once there'll be that revelation, but Oz, then Yavoyu Tzaddikim lebchinas habittul b'pnimius. That's when that tzaddikim will come to a higher level of bittul, an inner bittul, that's even deeper, inner bittul. Yeser be'emek acher emek. Next page, 1344. A deeper inner bittul, depth after depth, depth beneath depth. In other words, in deeper level, beneath even deeper levels. Ad, to the extent, shagam chemer gufam, that also the very matter of their body, their very body, bittul, bittul the neshama alakis, will be in a state of nullification or sublimation, like the bittul of the divine soul, or commission is ill. In other words, in Zman HaGolus, before Mashiach comes, even at Tzaddik Gomer, that doesn't have an animal soul, that has transformed it, and everything that a Tzaddik Gomer is about. But still, you can't say that Tzaddik Gomer is in the time of Mashiach. First of all, he's part of Golus because we're all part of it, so he's part of it too. But even relative to him, there is still a concealment of the divine, even though he's living with the divine as if the Gula is here, but it's still not the same, quite the same. And his body and soul are not completely seamless. Whereas Lasad Lovi, the Bittul, Mashiach comes, the Bittul will be like the Bittul of the Neshama Lekis, Im Kain. And due to that, Yiu benafshem kecheitim b'yeser. The tzaddikim will feel in their nefesh like increased sinners, even though they're not sin. But compared to that type of revelation, they will feel the inadequacy. V'yemrei slach lanu ki chatonu, and they'll say, "Slach lanu, forgive us for we have sinned." Mitam hanal, due to the reason, the above mentioned reason, shalafi erech hakiru v'amayla kain yechshev hachet, because commensurate and relative to the closeness and to the quality of where you're at, the light that you have achieved, the height and the high level you've achieved, that's how the chet is considered. It's all relative to the level you've achieved. So when you reach such a level of bittul, that will be lost level when Shema will shine in full glory. In that way, they will reach this level that they will be considered. That's why they'll be doing tshuva. And due to this, these tzaddikim will arrive to a level of tshuva ilah b'yeser, mitshuvas hapochus erech, to a level that's even greater tshuva than the tshuva of someone who's on a lower level. So again, just as they feel the sense of inadequacy or lack, or the blemish will be so intense for them, so their tshuva will also be so much stronger. And that's what it means that Moshiach asav tzaddikai b'tiyufta v'zeu shatoli tshuvasim b'Mashiach dafka. And that's why their tshuva is dependent on dafka Mashiach. It doesn't come on its own. Lefi sheba yeir oyer d'shem ma hachodash mebli helam elavush klal. Because the Mashiach will radiate the Shema Chodesh. Shema Chodesh means the Shema that emerges outside of Ak, that will be without any concealment and garment at all, like the garment of the face or the forehead, and the forehead. Ukamesha Kosev, like it says on Mashiach. How do we know Mashiach is at that level? Because it says, Hine Yaskil Avdi. V'gova ma'oid l'mayla mebchinas Adam. Hine Yaskil Avdi. Here, now, behold, my servant, Yaskil, will innovate, will conceive. The Gova Ma'oid, and it'll be very high level. Ma'oid is the level, Adam, is the same letters as Adam, but reversed, because he'll be higher than Adam. So Ma'oid means very much like Ma'idecha. Adam is the structure of Adam as it is today. And here he'll reach a level, but Mashiach will be a level of Ma'oid, Gova Ma'oid. L'mayla mebchinas Adam. Behind the Adam mebchinas. That Adam, meaning the human being, will come to a level being beyond human being. That's an expression, Kiloi Adamhu, that the Eibishter is beyond being the human structure, even though the Eibishter manifests in Adam Elyon, like we learned earlier. Adam Elyon, Salam Elakim, we were created the divine image. But here we reach a level even higher than the structure of Ishtalshlus, of the image, where he said before, the level of Ma'id, and by the when Adam Salo Azar Tzaddikim, and the Tzaddikim will therefore then elevate in a higher level, in their level of Bittul and sublimation and nullification by Dezeh Dafke Hu Hatshuva Shalahem. And Dafke, because that Aliyah will come, this the high level of Tshuva that only can come through the revelation of Mashiach. Okay. Before we read on, I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask him.
So in times of Mashiach, when there's this greater revelation, Shema, without any barrier, then the tzaddikim are going to, relative to that level of revelation, the tzaddikim are going to feel less than. They're going to feel like somehow they have sinned, because compared to that amazing revelation, they're going to feel less than, and then they're going to be driven to do tshuva, and then they're going to get an aliyah that's going to make them even higher. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what it means. When Mashiach Asal Asav Tzaddikai B'tiyufta, Mashiach will come to bring tzaddikim to tshuva. What does that mean? They don't have any sins. What kind of tshuva? So the answer is because when there's a higher revelation, there's a higher sense of a blemish. Seems much more. It becomes much more pronounced and amplified, and therefore that leads to a higher level of tshuva, connecting even more. Like we said before, when the higher you go, the more the lesser you feel in that sense, and that brings to a tshuva, a very deep level of tshuva. Now, there's the Gemara in Sukkah, famous Gemara, that says that Mashiach comes, that the Rishayim and the Tzaddikim will be shown the Yetzer Hara. They'll be shown the enemy, the evil inclination that challenged them. And the Rishayim will come to see that the Yetzer Hara was a very little mound. They thought it was a big monster, and they'll end up seeing it was a little thing. And they gave it a lot more power than it had. And Tzaddikim will see the opposite. They'll see how big the Yetzer Hara was. And that's what they overcame. That's what it says in the Gemara. So maybe you can explain the Gemara with what we're learning now. It's all relative how you look at life. In other words, like the story where the Baal Shem Tov sent one of his Talmidim. He said, how do you kabel Yisurim ba'ava? How do you accept Yisurim, affliction, with love? So he said, go see Rab Zusha Anapollah. So he went to Rab Zusha. Rab Zusha lived in tremendous poverty, and therefore tremendous, you can imagine, tremendous impoverished state. And when he came to him, he saw there's a man that's completely happy with his life. And he asked him, so the Baal Shem Tov said, I should come to you to find out how you live how can you live with such simcha, such joy and love, even though you're like literally living without complete poverty. She says, I don't know why the Baal Shem Tov sent you to me. I don't have anything lacking. This is the point. I know we're talking here the other way around, that you do feel the lack. I'm trying to say is that when you are in higher states of levels, the things that other people don't bother you. But then when you grow and you climb the mountain, you realize your own inadequacy. So it's all relative, like we discussed yesterday.
That muscle's in your book on pain and suffering.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
it's not mamish what he's saying here, to be honest, but it's the same idea of relative.
Huh.
Everything is relative in how we see life. Some people feel whatever they have is not enough, and some people feel everything they have is more than enough. Same thing is the other way around. Some people they really do terrible things, and they don't think it's so bad. There's other people don't do anything really bad, but they think it's the worst because they're on a much more subtle and a higher level. Their standard is higher. That's the point I'm making here.
So,
so that's what Moshiach will do for these tzaddikim. Now, we'll see now shortly, he's going to explain how we see now the yichud of Ma'aban in a tzaddik, because that's what the next section he's going to explain. That we're going to see two things here in the tzaddik, and then he's going to move over to the Baal Teshuva. Yeah,
maybe this is, well, yeah, I mean, let's say God's willing, Moshiach comes tomorrow. And you were saying, like,
or today,
or today, and there's this great revelation. All this is happening. All that we just read is going to happen. And you said, well, we couldn't tolerate that level of revelation now because it would be too much for us. Well, I'll speak for myself and say, I'm trying hard, but like I got a long ways to go. So if I can't take that level of revelation today, right, this morning at 6:45 by me. So at 6:45 p.m. tonight, when Moshiach comes and there's this great revelation, like how am I going to tolerate it 12 hours from now? Now maybe that's what it means. When Moshiach comes, the whole world will see, your words are so much better than mine, but Malach Hashem Kol Haaretz, all the world will see godliness, and then they'll do tshuva. So maybe that's what it means. When Moshiach comes, then this revelation, I will say, oh my gosh, look how far I am. Look what I'm this. Then maybe it's a similar thing on a lower madrega. Is that the Indian?
Well, first of all, I can't talk for you. I definitely am not on this level of tzaddik he's talking about. I have plenty of actual sins. I don't need to climb very high to find them. But the point I wanted to make was this. What you're asking is, I think, conflating a few different things here. The concept, what you're asking is really not a question on what we're learning right now. You're asking in general a question, something I referred to, that today we can't have that full revelation. So what will suddenly change overnight? That's a legitimate question. I'll answer that question, being that it's part of the bigger picture here, and that's the generational changes. Remember, we're not standing alone. We come after thousands of years. We're midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. Or in the words of Chassidus, especially the Rebbe, that after thousands of years of hard work, we've refined the world, that the world can now receive a light that it would not have been able to receive many years ago, because there's a refinement that changed the physical universe. So even though you may not feel it personally, or I may not feel it, But the fact is that we are not considered cruel or wicked people. The worst thing that we can be called are ignorant people, or people who did not grow up, tinik shanishba, people who did not grow up with information or knowledge, an assimilated generation. But we have something which is the thousands of years of work that helped change the world and make it a keli for a likus. So when we say Mashiach comes now, it's not a miracle. If Mashiach came 2,000 years ago, that would require a zachu, the level of zachu, an achishena, that Mashiach is coming before his time. And even though the world is not yet refined completely, still God is sending Mashiach, which is what we wanted. But now the Momata Lamaila has been so deep, so much integration, so much internalization, that we are just like the end of the marathon and just running the last leg. And that's why we're able to contain light that our grandparents and great-grandparents could not contain, paradoxically. Not because they were on a lower level, but because they were not yet, the world wasn't refined enough. So that answers the question about why Mashiach can come right now and we'll be able to receive the level. The second issue is what will happen when that light shines. So for tzaddikim, that light, for them, relative to them, will expose the cracks that would not have been seen before. It's another good way of looking at it. The greater the light, the more every crack becomes revealed. Like I always say, when the light is dimmed, you don't see when the light is bright, you don't see cracks in the walls. When the light is dim, but the same is true the other way around. When the light becomes very bright, every little blemish, every little thing you see, it becomes pronounced. So for the tzaddikim, it will cause them to feel the inadequacy, and therefore the tshuva that will elicit. For the rest of us, we'll soon learn about Bali tshuva. Mashiach we don't need Mashiach to do tshuva for those that are not level of tzaddikim, this level of tshuva. So I just wanted to separate the two issues here.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was well said. I was just saying, if we feel the need, our impoverishment spiritually now, those of us who are not tzaddikim and have a lot of things to work on, what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? We're going to feel even smaller. Like you said, we're going to feel even more insignificant. Now, maybe that's going to cause the great despair and the learning, maybe not rock bottom, but we'll definitely feel lower. And maybe that will spur us on to tshuva. I don't know.
Or you can give a very different narrative. When Mashiach comes, we'll recognize that we'll be rewarded and recognize that every little effort we made, what it achieved. And as far as any inadequacies, we'll do what tzaddikim do. It'll just be a motivation for us to grow even more. I don't see any room for despair, not for tzaddikim and not for the rest of us.
I like
Remember,
the glasses
Mashiach is a Gilead Lakus of that's beautiful. It's not if anything, Golus is the problem. Mashiach is never going to be a problem.
Yeah, but it's like going into Yechidus with the Rebbe. Like, I would be afraid to do so. Yeah,
that's because you haven't been trained by Chassidim that you go into the Rebbe. It's a great joy.
Even if you're like really, not feeling so good about yourself or look. I'm not a bad guy. I'm just saying relative to what it means to have Yechidus with the Rebbe. People would prepare. Some people would prepare for 3 years, and
You listen. All you can do is prepare as well as you can. You will not be judged for something you can't do. So for you, you don't have to be like, the whole point of all of this that we're learning is you don't have to be somebody else. You have to be yourself. You do what you can do. And that's all that's asked for. Now, if you feel you can do more, so do more. And if not, you can also rely on the compassion and empathy of these higher Giluim. You're not talking about anybody's interested in punishing anyone. Remember, this is all about, we're all connecting to something that is our creator who loves us, and there's a loving connection here. There's no negativity at all in this conversation, from my perspective, at all.
This is what we should have. I'll talk to you on the side. Maybe have a master class, universal class on this one. I'll talk to you on the side. What do you think? A good one, yeah?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll talk to you on the side. Thank you. That was really amazing. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now he continues. He says, so now v'hare yuchlalu. Now that we know this about a tzaddik, that this greater revelation is going to bring a higher level of awareness, and therefore a higher level of tshuva, higher level of awareness, and therefore a sense of that relative to that awareness, there's a kechetim b'yeser. So therefore, out of the resulting all of this, what do we have? That then the Moshiach comes, yuchlalu will be encompassed mebeis dvarim hovchim. Two opposite sensations, two opposite feelings. Ma'ayin liyesh. Al yedei gili shem ma lamata mata gam begufam. There'll be a gili from ayin. Remember, we spoke before about that by the tzaddikim. It's like from ayin to yesh, and by the Baal Teshuva, it's yesh to ayin. That from ayin, from the ayin alaki, the bittul and the lakus of ma, shem ma, will come down below lamata mata gam begufam. Also in the bodies of these tzaddikim, that they will feel it even in their very beings, their very physical beings. Shezeu ma'ayin liyesh b'slapsus hayesh, dechemer haguf kamoishu lamata dafka. That's ma'ayin liyesh, from the ayin alaki, from the divine sense of beyond yesh, beyond substance, will come into the substance, manifest within the substance of the chemer haguf, of the very matter of the body. Kamoishu lamata dafka, so the ayin of elikus will come all the way into the guf of the bodies of the tzaddikim, kamoishu is bar leil, as was explained earlier, and there'll be also the opposite sensation. V'gam yesh la'ayin. There won't only be the ayin to yesh, it'll also be from yesh la'ayin. Being that the tzaddikim are not just coming, like we spoke in chapter 9 in Tanya, that due to their great power of their divine soul, it radiates with such intensity that it spills over, mole v'godesh, into the left side of the heart and transforms the animal soul as well, to love God and not to be drawn to the pleasures of this world. That's ma'ayin liyesh. That's from Shem Man to Shem Ban, from the Oyed into the Keli. Now he's saying, but since the tzaddikim also going to have a sensation of inadequacy, in other words, it's not just coming from Gili, you're also going to have a sensation of Yesh to Ayin, because they feel through the Teshuva, they feel increasingly a sense of inadequacy. Chaytim. Even though chaytim means sins, but it also means inadequacy. Chet l'ashel chsad. That's also due to the great Gili, is not just going to be a Gili that's so powerful that comes downward. In other words, what he's saying is, it's in the second level of sweetening the water. It's not just that the sweetness of the Eitz HaChaim is so powerful that it sweetens the water, the bitter water, and completely transforms it from the outside in, from the outside, from without, not from within. But there's also an element from within. Not quite like a Baal Teshuva, because a Baal Teshuva is in actual real darkness. But relative, because this great revelation has also exposed within them a sense of what may be lacking, so they also have that sense of, I don't want to use the word distress because he doesn't use min ha-meitzar, but still it has an element of like a chet relative to their level. So you also have the yesh going to the ayin. So you have the ayin to the yesh and the yesh to the ayin in the tzaddikim. So if it's coming from the Gili of Shema, Umakol Makim, and though it's coming from Shema, Hari Hatshuva, nevertheless, Hari Hatshuva he, B'pchinas Er Cheza Momata Lamaila, B'hu Ke'inyan Shem Ban She'ela Lamaila. So there's by them also an element of Er Cheza due to this awareness that they feel this inadequacy, like Chaitim, even worse than the sin of an actual sinner and a transgression of an actual sinner. That comes from the bottom up, like Shem Ban that goes from the She'ela Lamaila, that goes from the bottom up. So we see now that by tzaddikim there's a combination of the two. V'hu achibur, the Er Yashar ve'er Chezer. This is the joining, the fusion of Er Yashar, the light that comes from above goes downward, and Er Chezer, the refractive light that comes from the bottom up. V'hu ayichud the Ma'al Ban, the joining of Ma and Ban. Now, I already mentioned this earlier in the previous class, and also today, I'll say this, explain, because when you read this, it gets very confusing initially. 1 second here. Till now, we were talking that the tzaddikim is Ma, or Yashar. Everything, from light, is coming to transform darkness. Suddenly now we've introduced the concept that they also have ban, chayzer. So obviously it's not quite the ban and chayzer, as he's going to explain. This is the ban within ma. But he wants to show, if you remember, I elaborated on this, that just as the Rishimu, the concealment also it conceals light, that the light also has in it keli, also has in it, namad is also ban. That the tzaddikim, even though their primary work is coming from a place of light, but even light recognizes darkness. That's relative to them. As they get higher and higher, they recognize the darkness that's relative to them, and therefore they have an element of tshuva similar to Baal Tshuva, because there's something to anguish over. There's something to be, even distress over. What is it? They're not distressing because they haven't reached the highest level of elikus, only that. It's more than that. They sense their inadequacy that you could only sense when you're in a state of such profound light. In a way, you could say that the deepest levels of Oyer have also an element of revealing how Oyer is inadequate compared to the Helam Ha'atzmi. In other words, the Oyer also has a sense of Helam. By reaching such high levels, it recognizes that it is lacking something. Because till now we talk Oyer is not lacking. Oyer is Gilead Lakus. We know that it doesn't have the Helam Ha'atzmi, and only a Baal Tshuva can reach Helam Ha'atzmi. But now, even the Oyer, which means the Tzaddik, can also have a sense of something by feeling this inadequacy. It's still not quite the third level of transforming the bitter from within, the Gvuras Nimtokim B'Sharsham, as we're going to learn. But you find something now in the Tzaddikim that they could identify with what we call an inadequacy. Till now, we saw tzaddikim as only perfect and more perfect and more perfect. They keep growing in V'ruach Toshav Elokim because God is Ein Sof, so they keep growing. But now we're also seeing that they also can have a sense of ban and this Mamata Lamayla Chayzer that was till now we understood it to be something that's exclusive to Baalei Tshuva. That's why you say Moshiach will bring tzaddikim to Tshuva. He will give tzaddikim a taste of tshuva like the real tshuva, except it's not real tshuva on an actual sin, it's a relative sin compared to their level. That's what he's saying here. So it's pretty interesting and profound how the Rebbe Rashab is taking this now to another level. And now he qualifies exactly what I just said. It's true, we have now Yichud Ba'aman relative to the tzaddik, but it's not Shem Ban Mamish. Why? Because their tshuva is not coming from actual cheshach, God forbid. They're never in a real state of darkness. They did not sin. They did not fall. They did not like Rabbi Elazar ben Zerdaya. They never did anything that they never transgressed against God, ever. So you can't say it's cheshach mamish chas v'shalom. Ki im ha'sha'ir l'cheshach nechshav. Listen to this level. It's unbelievable. That rather it's a that's considered like darkness because it's so reached such a high level. It considers itself like darkness compared, recognizing where it's the high level it's at. So it's like a that's nechshav l'cheshach. So the has come to realize it's inadequate. Can you imagine this level? That's something. Wow. And I find it mind-blowing, to be honest. V'hainu, and now in the parentheses he adds, v'hainu, this means mashaveda lechet nechshav, that their service is considered like a chet for them. They feel so inadequate that the service that they did is considered like a sin, relative again. The gam bezeh shaved, and also additional point in this is shaved ena betachlis kedeboy kanal. So besides the fact that they recognize that the aved is like a sin compared to, because they've reached this high level. They also see the Avodah is not betachlis kedeboy kanal, be'inyan slachlod she'emer b'shmeina esra. That the Avodah is not. That's why they say slachnon. Now, what's the difference between the 2 points? Mashaveda lechet nachshav, the Aveda is considered inadequate, and the Aveda is not betachlis kedeboy. Yeah. Trying to figure out what's the difference between these two things he's saying here. Before he said Aveda shlam nachshavim kechetim, the parentheses on the bottom of last page. Compared to the truth of God, their truth is not real truth. Okay, let me read on. Let me see if I can figure it out.
The Or feels himself completely distant from the Mayor and inadequate compared to the Mayor.
Yeah, that we know. He just seems to be saying two things here. Because the Veda is like considered like a chet, compared, but that's also. And then he says, I think there's two things here. One, that the Aveda, whatever the Aveda is they consider to be just inadequate. And then the actual, once they come to a higher state of awareness, they realize that the Aveda is not complete. That's why you say Shlach Lanu. Now, I know it sounds very similar to the two things I just said, but it looks like nevertheless, either way, it's not mamish cheshach. You can't call it actual darkness. It would be like the difference between somebody who's sitting in actual darkness and compared to light, that's real darkness. Another person who's been living in the light, but then they suddenly exposed to a much higher light, and that light suddenly you realize, 1 second, it's a pretty shady light. So it's all again the relative. So the chet nechshav is probably saying it's considered a sin because it's like a blemish, something they didn't know before. That it's like an actual blemish that you didn't see before because you weren't on a higher level. But suddenly you see something like a piece of dust on the eye, like we described, or during surgery. Suddenly certain things take on a whole new meaning, and something that yesterday would not have been considered an inadequacy today is. The second thing is, this is how I would explain. The second thing is when you get to that higher level, you realize your avoid is not complete. There's much more to do. And that's why you say Slach Lanu. But it's not actual darkness. And this is about Derech Mashakosu B'Lekut Teira Ma'arizal. I mentioned this already earlier. This is similar to what the Arizal, Lekut Teira of the Arizal. There's a book called Lekut Teira of the Arizal on Parshas. The Chayla B'Gematria Memtes. Chayla, which means a sick person, is the equivalent. The gematria of it is 49. Shechosaloi Shad Hanun. He's lacking the 50th gate. So 50 is complete health. Lacking one of the 50 gates of Bina, Chamishim Shari Bina, causes the person to be Chayla. Shezeu Shekosa B'Meshe V'Tachshadeo Ma'at Melikim. Says by Moshe that he was lacking something, just a little bit from godliness. Now, in the end of his life, he realized that he's lacking the 50th gate. He reached 49 gates. So it's not like actual darkness. 49 gates, like I said earlier, if someone reaches 1, 2 gates is already a big achievement. 49 gates, no one can call darkness. But compared to the 50th gate, he's lacking chosr. So he's called chayla, memtes. Like it says elsewhere, as explained earlier, and actually the page is on the end of volume 2, page 1200 actually. So on page 1200 it discussed it. The Magid, Mizritcha Magid teaches that when Moshe went up on Har Nevoi, so the mountain was called Nevoi. Nun Beis Vav. So the Magid has a beautiful interpretation. Nun Beis Vav is Nun Boy. Because till then he only reached 49. On Har Nevoi, and when he passed away and God kissed him on Mrs. Neshikin, then he reached Nun Boy, the 50th was within him. That was only when he went up on that mountain. But till then he was still 49, so it's still Chayla. But it's obvious that doesn't mean he was actually a sick person, God forbid, and actual darkness. Rag b'tzaddikim. It's only that in tzaddikim, it's sad, milas nafshem, due to the quality of their soul, the dakus hargoshosam, and the subtlety of their sensitivities and feelings, hinegam b'inyonim ke'elu, hatshuva me'emek uprimis hanefesh. So even in things like this, small thing like missing the 50th gate, well, it's not a small thing for them. Their tshuva is from the depths and the innermost part of their soul, just as it is in a person who's coming straight from darkness. For them, on their level, again, the level of their soul and dakus hargoshosam, and the subtlety or sensitivity of their feelings or their sensitivities, they come to this level of tshuva. So it's a level of ban, but it's not ban, actual ban choshech. It's like the choshech relative to them, both the feeling the lack, feeling like it's an illness, and also that the avodah is not adequate. V'yashleimer, and we can say shezeh b'chinas ban dema. That by tzaddikim it's the ban within ma. So they also have a ban and a ma, but it's all ban relative to within the ma. Like it says elsewhere, be'eliyahu. Remember, Eliyahu is gematria ban. Also, Eliyahu is nun beis 52. Shahoye b'chinas ban dema. It says he was ban dema. I believe it's in the Maimer Achodesh Hazeh, the one I mentioned yesterday that was posted. Because his avodah, in contrast to Moshe, which was mostly in the shama coming into the body, his avodah was bittul hachumri dafke. That's why he was ola basara shamayma. And when he passed away, he wasn't buried. His soul burned and his body went up with his body. His body went up with his soul to heaven because he was ban within ma. So he was a tzaddik, a novi, Eliyahu a novi, but in ma itself it was ban within ma. So you see here the scholars of the two from the perspective of the tzaddik.
Explain the difference, because you're calling both ban within ma. You call it Moshe and.
What do you mean both?
Eliyahu.
There was no both.
Well, you just referred to Moshe Rabbeinu as
Moshe
ban
is
within ma.
within ma.
Excuse me?
Moshe is shema,
Yeah.
and Eliyahu is ban of ma. That's what it says.
Oh, I thought you said both. Okay.
Okay. So we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph. And as you're going to see, this is that if you can keep in mind everything we learned in this volume, the previous, what's fascinating, what he's really doing here, he's bringing it together, Oyer and Keli, Gili and Helam, and light and darkness joining together. Now he's doing it from the perspective of Ma. The next paragraph is going to be the Baal Tshuva, is going to do it from the perspective of Ban, of Choshech. But ultimately, it is going to be a joining of the two, because the ultimate union, the ultimate yichud is v'yadaita hayoim v'ashavesa levavecha ke'avayu alakim v'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas, and then he says ein oid. So we need havayu alakim, which is oid and gili and helam, and we also need ein oid, the quality of helam itself. But we're coming together, bringing it all together now. So he's really tying together all the concept of Gili HaEtzem, the Gili HaEtzem in the Yesh, all the way down below. Okay, Yesh Ma'ayin and Ayin and Yesh L'Ayin, from the Ayin to the Yesh and from the Yesh to the Ayin. Okay, I'll stop here. Anybody has any questions?
Rabbi Jacobson, I understand. Actually, this is fascinating, as you said, the levels you're talking about. My question is this: that how come when tzaddikim pass on to the next world and they're sitting and seeing godliness, how come they don't come to this realization when they have such revelation of godliness, yet they will have it when Moshiach comes? Remember, like they're sitting with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the crowns on their head, that they say, and getting ready. They're getting actual godliness. How come that level does not make him do this teshuva and Moshiach would? Unless one can make the argument that it's the goof part of the tzaddik that has to do the teshuva. There's something that was not accomplished by the goof that they realized. Is that fair to say?
That is one thing. That's one piece. And another, if you go back around 30, 50 pages back, he discussed at length the difference between Gan Eden and Elam Haba. Remember? Gan Eden at the end of the day is the revelations. It's not this Gili Ha'etzem of Shema that will come when Mashiach comes. So as high as Gan Eden is, true neshamas will definitely keep climbing as they go in Gan Eden. We know Yelchem Achayil Al Chayil, they keep going higher and higher. But this level is only in Elam Haba, which is more than just Gan Eden in the Ruchnius Dika worlds. This is Elam Haba that will come with Chiyas HaMesim, like he says, souls and bodies, but it's a higher level than Gan Eden. We learned this before, if you recall. Mashiach's coming. Yeah, but it is connected because he spoke about it much earlier. Yeah. You go back to what mitzvahs do, what mitzvahs accomplish more than Gan Eden. Anybody, any other questions? If you go back to page 1276, he explains what the Schar Mitzvah is Bahai Al Maleka, and yet we get something here that will only be, when Mashiach comes, will be a level that's even higher than Gan Eden. Spoke about it at length. On page 1277 as well, yeah. So he says that Gan Eden will be Ein Ze Etzem HaMitzvah. But Amitis HaSchar VaHamshacha, the Etzem HaMitzvah Yeh La'osid, will be in the future. Not today. Not in Gan Eden. Yeah. Yichud Pnimi. And the reason is because it will be in the body, as you said. That's correct. Okay, so we'll stop here at the end of the paragraph.